Hello there, welcome back to another episode of the BARROW Podcast. Today, I am joined by David Goodwin, author of Servo, a memoir that was published a couple of years ago. David has generously agreed to come on and talk to me about all things Servo-related, working dead-end jobs, masculinity, literary culture, and much more. So I hope you enjoy this one. I had a blast talking to David. I thought it was really refreshing, really good. So before I go on any further, I'm now going to give you that interview. If you want to hear a little bit more from me, then stick around to the end and you can join me on the bonus track.
Yeah, no
and I'll do like an intro and all that sort of stuff in post as well. So if you want to send me a bio or anything that you want,
sure.
Just let me know.
Yeah, no dramas.
How are you going into the Australia Day long weekend?
Yeah, pretty good. I not really up to much right now. I'm just writing. I'm trying to turn Servo into a TV series.
Are you really?
There's a bit of interest. And yeah, just sort of learning how to script write, which I've never really done before. So just trying to read lots of books and learn, how to do that. So that's interesting. I've got a guy who really gets it, who gets what Servo's about and really wants to turn it into something awesome. So fingers crossed, something comes of that.
That's amazing. Yeah, that's really, really cool. I was thinking, I was sort of wondering about speaking of getting it, because it reminded me of a couple of things when I was reading it. I was thinking about writers that immerse themselves in a situation and actually have a properly lived experience. But I was also wondering about your influences in terms of Australian stuff. Are there any or?
Yeah, so the main formative text and the inspirational text, to put it, for Servo was He Died with a Falafel in His Hand by John Birmingham.
I've got that written on a piece of paper right in front of me.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's pretty self-evident when you read it. It's I think I read that book for uni. We actually studied it when I was studying at Deakin Uni doing professional writing.
Yeah.
And when I read it, I realized that there was a way to write that was a bit sort of gonzo, as you were kind of intimating, sort of Hunter S. Thompson style, but Aussie.
Yeah.
And I didn't even know anything like that really existed. And I think I got about halfway through that book and I just went, oh my God, I can do this. It felt like I was being given permission to write in a certain way. And that character, I think, sort of worked its way out throughout the book, and it stayed fairly true to that original kind of voice and that kind of tone. I think that, Servo is such an Aussie story, and it was of a time that is now quite different to today because a lot of things have changed. But I wanted to be true to the story at the time and the voice at the time. And John Birmingham was definitely, he really, really helped me understand how to do things.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah, no, it sort of felt like, in the best way possible, a bit of a throwback to that era where I was thinking, I wrote down Died with a Falafel in His Hand. I thought of Praise by Andrew McGahn. And I remember going through, because I was also doing a BA at university and working some dead-end jobs in a call center and various things. And it was just so reminiscent of that time. And I sort of have a kind of a nostalgia for like even little things that you would bring up, the people in picture magazines, in classic reading material. It was great. I really enjoyed this book, which is why I reached out to you, obviously. Did you ever read, what else did Birmingham do? Tasmanian Babes Fiasco, is that one?
Yeah, that was the sequel to Falafel, which wasn't as good, but still had some really cool bits in it. It just has that that sort of instant absurdity where you've got these crazy situations that appear out of nowhere, and you've got it told with this distinctly Aussie voice, and it's
Mm.
irreverent, deliberately so, and it's got this kind of charm to it, I think. And yeah, I mean, he was quite a diverse writer in the sense of what he was writing about. He had quite a few different. He did like a history of Sydney. I think it's called Leviathan, and then he moved into fiction and did these alternate history books that sort of that I really enjoyed, that were like all about an alternate World War II and time travel and all of this stuff. So he's got quite the repertoire of different genres that he's sort of worked with. So yeah, I just really think that those kind of quintessential Australian voices that explore something that hasn't been done before, or at least hasn't been done in that way, are really important. And yeah, they're important for future writers. You would look at people today who are writing, and they're going to find that one book or maybe several books that just make them think, oh, I can do this now. I see how it's done. And I think that's the really important thing.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I was thinking that about this. This is like I was thinking Servo is probably a gateway text for some guy down the road who's, going through that sort of lost transition period in life. And yeah,
Yeah,
it's highly relatable. And it's the kind of writing and the kind of book that, as you say, it gives people the confidence to do it for themselves. And I like this is a personal take, and I can't back it up with evidence or something, but like it's my feeling that these kinds of books have been lacking a little bit. Like they've been thinner on the ground, particularly in
very
Australia.
much so. Yeah, I feel that what's been fascinating about Servo is it's been almost 2 years since it was published, and pretty much all of the correspondence that I get, obviously, I think the figures in Australian publishing is that women are about 80% of readers, roughly, and yet the overwhelming majority of who's contacted me are men.
Yeah.
Um, so Servo is unapologetically masculine, I think, with the voice that it is written in, and I did that deliberately. And what I've found is, in the first couple of weeks when I was all so excited with the debut book and I was reading all the reviews as you do, and it was on Goodreads. And what I found over time was that young millennial women do not like Servo.
Yeah.
Do not like it at all.
Yeah.
And what I found fascinating, there was one review that was absolutely hilarious. And I can't remember it word for word, obviously, but it was along the lines of he's very respectful to minorities and he's very this, and it was seething. And she says, I don't like it and I don't know why, but I don't like it. And it was just fascinating to read. And I think I almost wanted to message her and say, it's the voice. You don't like the voice. And
Well, that would have
as I
been
say,
that would have been a great move. Telling her what telling
yeah,
her what you're
that wouldn't have
thinking.
gone down too well. Would have been a fair bit of mansplaining and all of those things. But I think, as you said just before, you intimated that there's not much of that kind of book around because the world has changed. And, since Servo sort of set from 2003 to 2009. And beyond that, just beyond that, the world began to change in a cultural sense very rapidly in the 2010s. It really, really changed. And I think that Servo to some people is somewhat anachronistic, even though, like I say, I tried to make it loyal to the time in which it was written. And, the majority of that book was scrawled on register receipt rolls.
Yeah.
Um, Late at night, 3 a.m., in between confoundingly strange and slightly menacing people bursting in through the automatic doors. So there's not really this huge degree of lucidity, or, I would sit at my computer and get all of these strips of paper out and try and, shape it into some kind of intelligible narrative. And that was obviously a long process. And then again, working with an editor and so on and so forth. But yeah, to some people, a voice that is unapologetically male, unapologetically Aussie, maybe as opposed to Australian,
Yeah.
um, is anathema to some people because they have a different take on the world, and that's absolutely fine. I just knew that this book had to be true to that kind of part of Australia because back then in the early noughties, there was a huge heroin issue, for instance, and people were dying of overdoses, and people were still they were a lot more racist and they were a lot more sexist, and all of those things were there. And to not write about them felt dishonest, and to not write about things that were said in certain ways just had to be written that way. So like I say, there's a very clear delineation between the kind of uh, let's say laid back, nothing really phases them, Aussie kind of people whose curiosity has maybe been piqued by seeing a cover or hearing a review or something and going, oh, I'd like to read that. Maybe I don't read as much, but I'd like to read that, as opposed to people who maybe read a bit more literary fiction and read a lot more and are probably female and, culturally are maybe a bit more, uh, I don't want to use any of these buzzwords because people won't like me if I
Sure.
do, but
Yeah.
left wing or what some right wing probably people would call woke or whatever. Uh, it's not that kind of book. It doesn't, there was a review I got in the Australian, which was a fantastic review. It was this big double-page review by a journalist who was kind of like a celebrity journalist. I can't remember her name for the life of me now. And she pretty much said, this is the antidote to all the left-wing imperialism of the Australian publishing industry. And I was like, whoa, okay. So anyway, it was interesting to see that that point of view was shared by certain people, even though I wasn't deliberately trying to, create this woke antidote or whatever. So anyway, yeah, that kind of to and fro I found really interesting in a
And
cultural
and
sense.
and I think that that kind of a review is wonderful, but then it's also completely unfair too because it doesn't sort of matter what side of the aisle you're on. There seems to just be this obsession with trying to pin people down and corner them. And I
Yes.
like I really I fundamentally don't understand it. I just don't really get why this has to happen, why everything has to be labeled because in terms of the voice, and I'm glad we're talking about this because I was like, well, it's interesting to me that this was published ultimately because I think those objections, crude, whatever, that
Yeah.
could be leveled at it by a certain personality, um, could work against it. And I was going to ask you about by the way, I don't think it's crude at all. And what I was going to say is that
Oh, I
you
know
know
completely what you mean.
you know
There's
it,
no,
it
yeah, no.
yeah it,
Trust
it
me, it was a lot cruder in the
yeah,
past.
okay,
Like,
yeah, sure.
yeah,
But it does, or it's doing, and I think a lot of that is baked into how it was composed, is that, I think good literature, or the work that literature does, whether we're talking nonfiction or novel or whether it's literary or not, is that it's kind of a historical record at the same time. So
yeah,
trying to get that time and place, and so censoring things or excluding certain kinds of voices, I feel like you know you want to capture culture and history as it was on a certain level, and like these are documents for people to look back on. So you don't want to sort of get in there with your politics or ideology one way or the other
yeah,
and limit that. I
yeah.
don't get that, Sam. I don't get why people do that. Um,
It's ego. People like the vicious, almost now vicious level of bifurcation that exists on, social media and algorithms and all the stuff we're all now aware of. It's this feeling of safety. It's like if I can put you in this box, I understand who you are. And if I understand who you are, I can understand generally what you're going to do. But it also is this, oh, I feel, it all comes down to, I've often said this to people, it all seems to come down to this one line, which is I'm a good boy or I'm a good girl, and you're a bad person or a bad boy or a bad girl. And it's very simplistic and it works and it makes me terrified and it makes me sad that it does work.
mm,
That people are so intent on putting people, are you right wing? Are you left wing? Do you think this? Do you think that? And it's like, I don't think any of it. I don't care. I just want to interact with you as a human being. So it's sad and it's the way the world is, but people want that safety. The world's a chaotic and strange and
yeah.
increasingly confounding place. So people are going to take that safety or perceived safety where they can get it, I think.
Yeah, and when you come at it from that perspective, you can come at it with some sympathy. In terms of the reality of it though, what was getting this to publication? Like what was that pathway? What happened?
Oh, that was a journey. That was a very long journey.
I
So
imagine it was, yeah.
I started really writing it. So I started the job in 2003, and it wasn't probably until about late, maybe mid 2006, where I started going, I think I've got a book here. Like, I don't know how it will work, but I think there's something there. So I spent the next year and a bit writing it and trying to shape it into something. And I sent it off to an agency. And I got an email back saying, yep, send us, sent the first two chapters. And they said, send the whole thing in. It sounds great. We want to read it. And that was after 3 days, which I was just shocked at. And then I got, I sent the whole thing, and this woman, who ended up as my agent, she said, it's good, but it needs work. And can you put more of yourself in it? Can you flesh this out? And so I went back and rewrote a lot of it. And then, yeah, ended up with an agent. And there was a lot of interest from actually quite a few publishers. And, we were working with, she was working, trying to get it published. And in the end, they all said no, funnily enough, due to what you were talking about before, the crude, rough edges of it. They said it's got real promise. We think it could do well, but it's just a bit too rough for us. So that didn't work. Nothing happened for a couple of years. Then one of my best mates was going out with a woman who worked at Penguin, so we tried again. We got through to acquisitions, but I think it was Ben Ball at the time was head of Penguin, didn't like it, said it needed too much work, same deal. And then years and years later, I just went, I've got to rewrite this. It's terrible. I realize what I need to fix, and I know what I need to add in. So I went and found my old agent, Sophie Hamley, who now works at Hachette. And so that was, useful. So I contacted her. I said, you may not remember me. And she said, David, I was just thinking 2 days ago about how crazy it was that this never got published. So anyway, she said, I'll take it to acquisitions meeting. And I didn't hear a thing for a whole year. So I said, okay, it's done. And then she called me back, just one day and went, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened. I'm taking this to acquisitions tomorrow. Boom, calls me up. Yep, done, published.
Okay.
So
Wow.
it took a long time, many, many, many years. But at the same time, it felt sudden when it happened. So there was a bit of luck involved. There was a bit of persistence, I suppose, to continue trying to get it there. But it all lined up in the end, and it finally got to, have its time in the sun. So, well, the halogen is probably more accurate than the sun.
Yeah, gee, that is a long time though. But also, I mean, it is and it isn't. I mean, it's a book and it's the arts
Yeah.
and it's luck, right? In some, not what I mean by
Without
that,
question, it's luck. Yeah.
but that's actually kind of reassuring at the same time that like
Yes.
a project
Yes. Other
never,
writers have said that.
yeah, it's never dead, like
Yeah.
it's there. And I mean, it is all about finding someone who understands it. I mean, I think this
Yeah.
is it's this chronic kind of disease of like you finish something to the best of your ability and it is actually good,
Yeah.
but no one will say that or no one will
Yeah.
accept it to the full extent, which is
Yeah.
publication. And you're left to just kind of stew in this self-doubt that
Yeah.
becomes so destructive over time,
Oh, massively. I think that, how do I put it? There's this hunger among writers for, yes, for validation. Obviously, this is a human
Yeah.
desire, but there's also just this hunger for data about, like, qualitative data about your writing from people that you feel are important. Their opinion matters. And, you just want to know that what you've written. I mean, there's the marketing angle. So Servo was obviously always blessed in that the marketing was going to come fairly easy.
Yeah.
It's such an iconic institution within Australia. Like I always say, it's part of our O suffixed vernacular. Like Servo, Avo, Arvo, Garbo, Bottle-O. It's right there. It's so quintessential. So there was no issue with that. It was just, can we get it to a level where the narrative was flowing and sort of full enough that, it held people enough for the other stuff, the humor and the iconic elements of the Aussie stuff to come through. So, and then the benefit of that is the iconic qualities also may be transferred to the screen. And I think that's why the interest is there. So, like growing up as a kid, I always wanted to be a writer. And there was this, oh, I just don't know what to write and I don't know how to do it. And I'm never going to be as good as these people I'm reading and all of that doubt you're talking about. And then you find the thing, they always say, write what you know, and you find the thing that you know, and then you find, as I said, the way to write about it that I got from John Birmingham. And I went, okay, now this works. Now I can do it. And like you said, I was like, I know this is good. I know it's got something. I know I can write.
Yeah.
It's just, can we get it past the gatekeepers and how do we do that?
Yeah.
And so you've got to worry about marketability, especially today. Like authors are expected to market themselves,
Yeah.
whether it's on social media and you've got to have your website, you've got to do all of these things and TikTok videos, like you never used to have to do video. And writers don't want to do video. Writers don't want to sit here on screen talking about stuff. It's uncomfortable. We're generally, we don't have that kind of personality. We're generally introverts, and to force us into that kind of energetic exchange with that kind of being seen is difficult. So there are a lot of different moving parts to being a writer today, but really it's all about that big what do I call it? That wall you've got to get over, which is, yes, acceptance of publication, because then you are a writer with a capital W.
Yeah.
And before you were a writer with a small W, where it's kind of like not mumbled, but it's like, oh yeah, I'm a writer. Oh, you're right. Yeah, but oh no, I'm an author. Like it's
that's the word I think of. I always think of the author with a capital A. So it's like you're a
okay.
writer, but then you become the author. Once you've
Yeah.
got that title out, you're the author, and it's and that's a huge shift. It's a big change, and
Yeah.
you need it. And what's not happening anymore is that publishers aren't taking those chances on those early books from writers.
Yeah.
I always think of like Christos Tsiolkas, whose first like two or three novels just kind of, they're sort of, I mean, they did okay, I think, and they're sort of bigger now in hindsight.
Yeah.
But, I think it was Allen and Unwin took a chance on him, and then you get to title number 3 and 4, and you're getting the slap, and it's getting turned into a TV show, and it's like,
Yeah.
publishers want title 3 or 4 first, but to get there, you can't go unpublished to get there because you'll give up. And
It's kind of like like you get a band that comes out with an incredible first album, and then you get to the second and the third album and you realize that's all they had.
Mm-hmm.
The Vines were a great example.
Yeah.
And it was like, oh wow, that's so good. So that's what publishers want from writers. They want a huge splash on the first book. It's got to be incredible.
Yeah.
And that generally, as you were saying, doesn't happen. You've got to get better as a writer, and you've got to get better once you get published in that kind of space where you're learning to be an extrovert in some senses, as I say, and maybe doing a writing festival or two, but you're also learning about marketing, what works, how to work with editors, but you're still trying to be creatively true to yourself. And it's a different kind of dance than it was before, I think is what I'm trying to say. And yeah, they just want this, they want everything now, and there's more and more demands, but there's still crappy pay and terrible conditions, and there's no money in writing, so you're doing it for what? You're doing it I think ideally you're doing it because you have to, because there's something that drives you to express yourself in a certain way, and you get such a kick from that energetically that it's just what you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
But to those who are about, oh, I want to make it, and I want to make lots of money, and I want to, it's like you're in the wrong profession. But
yeah,
it's the way it is, and it sucks. And I wish there was a way to change that. But with what's happening with AI, it's we're in such a bizarre confluence of eddies right now.
Yeah.
And no one really knows where it's going to go, in that there may be this pushback that will grow and grow. And it's like, I just want real stuff from real people. Like you'll see it in comment sections
mm,
on every kind of social media. Fuck off with your AI slop. We don't want this.
mm,
And oh my God, this was actually made by a person. Oh, I want to read it. I want to see it.
yeah,
So I don't know. I think that we need to obviously value our artists more in of our different pursuits, but how we're going to do that moving forward with all of these challenges is going to be fascinating. And then how is that going to relate to publishing and sales and all the rest of it? So yeah, who knows? Who
yeah.
knows?
Um, sort of picking up on that, but sort of maybe moving the conversation a little bit was, I'm thinking of one thing I've been thinking is lacking generally culturally in the arts, but culturally, and it's sort of crept into my mind reading this book is like the idea of mentorship. And I was thinking of being a young man and needing guidance. I didn't have a father growing up, and I definitely related to your, well, I don't know how much he is exactly you. There's always a character self as well, probably. But, the version of yourself in the book, I really sympathize with. I could relate to. There was a sort of a, I mean, I don't want to project, I don't want to tell you about yourself, but there's kind of like a
I know.
lost,
I'm always
lot,
fascinated to hear.
yeah, it seemed to be like a lost kind of person in,
Mm.
in some ways. And,
Oh,
I
for sure.
transitioned into, the adult world wanting to be a good boy and a good student and go and pursue my arts course. And that was 2007. And then the world really changed culturally, and I couldn't really find footing exactly. And
Yeah.
yeah, I was just thinking about like what what has your life been like post working at the service station? Because it was presumably it was a big trauma, and
Oh,
in a
yes,
lot of ways. And so
definitely.
how have you dealt with that? How have you processed that?
Okay, so yeah, so I was a shy and
Yeah,
unassuming student when I got the job. I think I was 20 years old
yeah,
when I got it. So it was, it was like getting dumped into this mad dark circus of scheming grifters and giant shoplifting bees and retired wizards and pretty much every single snatch of madness you could possibly imagine. But then there was also the constant physical threat of violence.
yeah,
And, I've got a history of pretty serious childhood trauma that I didn't know about until later. So obviously there's trauma triggers and not feeling safe. And, back then there was no locked cage with a door with a keypad and everything anti-jump protection wire. It was just open. So anyone could just walk around the console and beat me up. So, obviously, for my nervous system and my sense of safety and all of that, I very quickly had to, as I talk about in the book, I had to armor up and I had to get wise. I was always fairly streetwise, I thought myself, but then very quickly I came to realize in a place like this, it's very different. And I think retail in general, for people of that age, it's a very it's almost like a universal coming of age, like a rite of passage in the sense that, you get a retail job and you're so excited and independence and money, and you're like this excited little Labrador puppy that
yeah,
just wants to do the right thing and please, as you were saying, like I'm going to be good, but the reality of these crappy wages and entitled customers and
mm,
all of, horrible demanding bosses and all of this rigid bureaucracy and stuff, it really quickly hits you. And I think quickly you learn that you've got to level up. You've got to, and people do that in different ways, depending on their collection of traumas and ways of functioning and dealing with the world. So for me, I was like, well, I've got to man up. I've got to get more tougher. I've
yeah,
got to develop this hard shell because I'm not going to survive here otherwise. So, there was that. And over the years, there was a lot of issues, not seeing the sun and had huge issues in the sleep deprivation and then
yeah,
drug use and all of that. I had serious depression in those years, and I didn't go into it to a great deal. I mean, I talked about it a little bit in the book, but I didn't really, it kind of would have changed the vibe just a bit too much. It would have added some depth, sure. But the book that I wrote another book, which was sort of the immediate sequel to Servo, which was essentially a travel book. That had a lot of Steve-O in it. One of the characters is Servo, but that's probably not going to see the light of day. So instead, I'm writing a book that is now all about trauma, childhood trauma, and is about coming of age, but is about these kind of things, but with a semi-Servo voice, but a lot more grown up. So that's in my mind what you're asking me, because that's what I'm writing about now.
Okay.
So yeah, that's probably third draft, fourth draft level, and just about ready to go to the publisher soon. So yeah, it's
That's so
interesting.
funny because I don't know what you know about what I'm doing, but I'm writing this co-authored memoir with
Yep.
my mom, and you know, I there's so much trauma from childhood that I'm sort of trying to process now, and I'm actually sort of on a pathway where I'm really thinking about changing career and going into counseling. Like that's something that I'm
Yep.
really considering. And so I'm reading this from that vantage, and I'm like, there's so much he isn't saying about his upbringing, and I'm just sort of questioning it, and that's fascinating to me, and not at all a surprise, like at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just didn't feel there was the room in
No,
that book
there wasn't.
or
Yeah.
to write about that. I wanted to, don't get me wrong. It was
No,
just
no.
that
Yeah.
I knew that what was coming after that, at least when I got to publication all those years later, I'd already written the first draft of another two or three books that would follow that were kind of like this. What did Jack Kerouac call his? He had this idea of all of his books together.
Yeah.
There's something of
I know what you're
Dumas. I
talking
can't remember
about.
what
I
he
can't
called it.
remember. Yeah.
So I've got like three or four memoirs lined up in my head after this. Two or three of them are written. And I'm
Uh,
like, what ridiculous level of conceit to even think that I would be able to publish that many memoirs. I'm not well known. I don't have any real, but I'm going to give it a shot. And
sure.
so anyway, yeah, trauma and all of those things that you saw the void of that were missing in there, that, like we say, needed their own place and are talked about. And I looked at a couple of your earlier podcasts and did laugh because the next book that's all about trauma is tentatively titled Duff's Pirates and Ayahuasca. Um, and interestingly, I went and had Aya years and years ago in Holland. Then I had it in Peru, and I've had it in a few other places. And
Yeah.
anyway, my mum followed me a few months later to Peru and had an incredibly transformative experience, and is, of course, writing her own memoir. So I thought I've got a bit in common with you. And,
That's
there's
funny.
a fair bit of overlap between my memoir and her memoir in that we're both characters in each other's memoirs.
Great.
So I laughed when I saw that
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
stuff. And I thought, well, isn't this kind of apt, So yeah, I mean, it's interesting to see that, Servo is very, in some ways, it's rather adolescent, and the next book is the grown up one. So it's going to be interesting to see the shift. But yeah, but that was the part of the story that needed to come out. And it
Yeah.
gets to come out in the next book, which is
That
great. So
that's great, and I think you have to service the book, and that's the right 100%. That's the right move. But like,
yeah,
yeah, just reading it, I was sort of yeah, a lot of kind of spider senses tingling kind of thing, going, nah, there's something here, yeah,
yeah,
that I'm sort of picking up on, and I think it's deeply ironic actually to go back to what we were talking about earlier is like whatever happens to sensitive, shy young man is there is like the crude voice and the humor is an escape. It's like
yeah,
it's a release, right? And that's
yeah,
the irony, and it's also what people do not understand when they're then going, "Oh, but this is really crude and too
yeah,
male." And it's like, yeah, but what you the guy who does that has had the shitty experience that you don't know anything about. And
yeah,
that is totally missed.
100%. I think that uh, so many books that people talk about and they think it's about this thing, I often look at and I go, it's about trauma. On the Road is a classic example, I think, talking to Kerouac, that it's a book about trauma, and he is massively traumatized by the death of his brother, I think it was,
I think it is.
younger
Yeah.
brother, T. I think he called him, or was that his name? I forget. But in the book, I think he changed it to his dad had died or whatever. But there's so much in that book where you're just like, this guy is so traumatized and he doesn't know it. So I think maybe, in so many books, yeah, as you say, people will look at the surface stuff and go, oh, it's crude, or it's a bit too much for me, or it's whatever. But yeah, they don't, as you've done, read into this deeper um sense of, oh, actually, he's doing this because, but then you have that understanding of trauma because you've been through it, and you're in this period of, I'm guessing, ongoing discovery about yourself and about these kind of things that affect, people moving through this stuff. And I mean, I'm the same in that I studied trauma, and I worked with, intense sort of, somatic experiencing and dedicated psychologists for years. So
Mm,
yes, that was the kind of post-servo work that
mm,
helped sort of inform what came after in terms of writing and living, I suppose. So, it's something that we're a lot more literate about than we used to.
mm.
Like I remember I'd written this next book about trauma after the other one didn't turn out in my mind. So I was like, oh, this is going to be great. But then as the years went by, trauma became this buzzword, and everyone's talking about
I
Gabor
know.
Mate and the vagus nerve and regulating your nervous system. And I'm like, fuck, they've done it. Back then it was new, but now it's so. So, that was a symptom of Servo taking so long to get out, that
Mm.
if Servo was published back in, say, 2009, like I wanted it to be, it would have been received, I think, quite differently, because it would have been more of its
Absolutely.
time. And I get the feeling there would have been a TV show, or maybe a film, maybe more likely, because it would have had more of an impact. Who knows? Maybe not. But there would have been this cultural impact that was different, because the culture was different, and now the culture is different from what it was. So, it's but yeah, I really appreciate your reading of that. To see that is very rare amongst responses and reviews of Servo. It's not the obvious thing to concentrate on, but as you have seen, it was the generative force for so much that happened in that book.
Yeah. Oh, the David in that book is so like myself at that point in time that
Yeah,
it's actually uncanny. Like
yeah,
it's like weird. It's almost uncomfortable.
yeah.
So I completely understand that. Um, yeah, well, anyway, did you have anything further that you wanted to add? Or anything you want to plug?
Um, no, I mean that's pretty much it. I don't really have too much of an online presence with it. I only really did the bare minimum. I made a website, just davidgoodwin.co,
Hmm.
because .com was gone. And I tried to buy davidgoodwin.com, but the guy wanted like 2 grand for it. And I was like, oh, fuck that. But no, I hope that people just yeah, they if they read Servo, or if they come across it and they think this would sound good. I wrote it to be funny first and foremost. I wanted to, give people a laugh. I just thought it was such a strange and bizarre environment. It's this hypercolor church of condensed capitalism, and everything is kind of squarely aimed at the pleasure and the threat sensitive parts of your brain. And
Hmm.
there's this incredible bath of halogen, and everything's turned up to 17, and the absolute immediacy of that, where everything's wrapped in this kind of constant technicolor screen, is something that most people don't really experience, because you're in there for a minute and a half, 90 seconds. And when you spend 8 hours a day, for God, I did 6 years of that server. Then I went to Europe to get sane for about 6 months. And then I came back and did another six at a different server.
Oh
So
wow.
I think all up, I think it was Malcolm Gladwell said, you need 10,000 hours at something to become an expert. I think I've got about 15,000 hours
Wow.
as, behind the console. So,
Yeah, wow.
yeah, it's a crazy, ridiculous, bizarre, hilarious, confounding, terrifying, joyous in some ways kind of experience. And I think that, as you say, that rite of passage for young people, especially men, but women too,
Yep.
that, in retail, and you're trying to figure out who you are, and maybe you're just beginning to become aware of certain traumas
Yeah.
and how that interplays with your place in the world and this kind of stuff. I think that, yeah, there needs to be more written about this. And, there have been over time, but yeah, Aussie ones that have a distinct place that people can enter into and just become okay with who they are and who they're becoming and all of those kind of things. So that was kind of what it turned out. But yeah, originally I just wanted to write something that was funny and explain the experience, the strange experiences that I had and the places I was in. So that's something that I feel Servo has done, and now it's time to move on to other things. But yeah, in relation to the TV stuff, it's still, up in the air. I don't know what will happen. And obviously, it's capricious at best, but yeah, fingers crossed that, there can be another telling of that story via the screen. That would be amazing, especially if I get to sort of have some, serious input into that. That would be great. And, finally make some money, proper money from a book would be awesome for a writer. Always a good thing. So, fingers crossed that turns out. And, yeah, in the meantime, I'm busy working on new stuff, and hopefully that will begin to see the light of day rather soon. So,
Okay. Fantastic. Yeah, great. Yeah. Well, congratulations and thank you for coming on.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks a lot, Tobe. It's been fun.
Hi there. Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed the interview I just did with David as much as I did. As I said in the beginning, it was really fun talking to Mr. Goodwin about his memoir, Servo, published by Hachette. I think what drew me to the book, and I talked about it sort of with David, I suppose, but what drew me to the book was the shared sense that I had with the character version of David portrayed in the memoir. And there were a lot of shared themes in what David seems to be going for, as things that I'm circling around now as well, especially where it comes to masculinity, mental health. There seemed to be a lot sort of bubbling away under the surface of things in Servo. How does a person find themselves in a situation like that, working a dead-end job and sort of stick at it? I had similar experiences. I think that, for me, it was coming from a place of very low self-worth, self-esteem, and feeling like I couldn't make appropriate standards for myself, that it was okay to, just go along with things, let life kind of fritter away. And I'm not saying that that's necessarily what he's talking about either in the book, but certainly that was what was resonating with me, and that's what was sort of coming up for me, as well as sort of like a kind of a darkness and the things that young men sort of gravitate towards, and trying to find yourself as you navigate that transition from school to university and into the adult world. It doesn't necessarily have to be a pathway through university, but yeah, all very relatable to me, as was the, consumption of alcohol and the drug taking and experimentation. Those things really hit home for me as well. And there was a violence and a menace to David's time working as an operator there in the service station. It's a frightening job. It's a really scary job, and there's violence in this book. And I recalled while reading it an experience I had as a young man where I watched a particularly brutal, bloody fight in the city, and it really scared me off nights out. It scared me off where I was at in life. It took me years and years and years to wake up, but if you are a particularly sensitive young person and you go out in the world and life comes at you, as it can, as it sometimes does, then that's a transformative thing to have lived through. So, for some of us, we need to write a book about it, and Servo is a very good book, and much credit to Hachette for putting it out. As I mentioned during the episode, I asked David about his pathway to publication, and I suppose I implied, if not said directly, that, I'm surprised it was published. And I'm not surprised because it's not a good book. I was surprised given the era we've been through, and the climate, and the sort of the taste of the taste makers and the people in arts institutions. There is a sort of a wariness to telling these kinds of stories now, which is really unfortunate. Like, that shouldn't be the case at all. We need these kinds of stories. Every book is a philosophical text in some ways. It's there to help you navigate life, both the world around you as well as your internal self, internal life. And books like Servo, I think ultimately they serve a great purpose for, future generations and future readers. That, this can be a way to, through reading, to navigate life and navigate your own situation. So naturally, I thoroughly recommend it. I will go and make sure that all of those links are available to you. And yeah, just look in the notes if you're listening to the audio only version of the podcast. Otherwise, they'll be in the description to the video on YouTube. As I said, hope you really enjoyed that one. You got something out of it. And I'm very, very grateful to David Goodwin for joining us on the show. And like I said, much respect to Hachette for putting this title out. It's refreshing, it's much needed, and yeah, go and check it out. Go and read it for yourself. That's it for right now. There'll be a new episode of the Barrow Podcast out on Sunday, where Mum and I will be getting into our usual debates, discussions about all manner of things related to our own story. Hope to see you on that one as well. Until then, bye.